Hi there, it's Tamara Doris, your Sacramento real estate professional and Sacramento real estate professor. And today I want to talk about a topic that can sometimes feel a little cringy because it has to do with money. Now, we can say, like, compare selling your house to a yard sale. You put a price on something, and if no one wants to give you that price, fine, they don't get it. Well, that unfortunately is the mindset and the approach that many home sellers take, not just in the Sacramento area, but all over the place. And I want to help you understand why that type of thinking can really slow down your sale of your property, possibly even preventing it. So, of course, at a yard sale, you can say, I have this glass and I'm only selling it for $5. If you don't want it, you don't get it. But think about your house. If you put a price on it that you think it's valued at and nobody wants to pay it, then of course you can take it off the market, or you could just indefinitely leave it on the market at a price that you have decided. But here's where things get finicky. You don't get to decide what buyers are willing to pay for your house. And I know at first that's like, what? That doesn't make any sense. But here's the truth of the matter. Real estate is a commodity, and all commodities are cyclical, meaning they go up and down in value, but they also have comparable prices that establish the value of a home. So what comes into play? What are the components of that? Well, first of all, the very telltale sign is what properties in your specific area, not a mile away, not 2 miles away, not even a mile away sometimes. It depends. It's a whole different ballgame if you have a rural property, or if you're, like I am. I'm right between Carmichael and where it turns into Arden Arcade. So I could go one long block and I would be in a different zip code. So there's all sorts of variables, which is another reason you definitely want to have a professional who knows the market. You want someone who knows the market of your area, because these things come into play. But I'm going to put all of those variables aside, and I'm just going to talk nuts and bolts of how you price your home. We've got recent sales in your vicinity. And when I say vicinity, I usually go out with a quarter mile. If it's in a normal like tract home area, like much of Carmichael is, I go a quarter mile. So those homes that have sold, what are they? Those are evidence of the value of your home. It's proof that buyers were willing to spend, and proof that lenders were willing to lend. That's an important point we're going to come back to. So that proof is evidence that your home's range is somewhere in the range of what that home sold for. Now, I do want to point out that we have to compare in comps apples to apples. If you've got a big, like a mansion, rebuilt, custom home, and next to it is something that was built in the 1950s that's never even seen the light of day as far as a general contractor. It's just like, old school. That's a whole different ballgame. That's not comparing apples to apples. Appraisers will compare apples to apples. I will compare apples to apples. And your buyers will compare apples to apples. So, it's hard to get your head around this, and I understand it. But at the end of the day, the buyers decide what a property's valued at. And if they have a good agent, and hopefully they do, they're going to look at the comps and realize that evidence comparing apples to apples puts you in the range of value that your property fits into. So, recently sold homes, super important. The second is pending homes. We will look at homes in your near vicinity, again, a quarter to a mile, if we can do it that way, that have recently sold, but they haven't closed yet and they're in escrow. And it's really not that hard to pick up the phone as an agent, to pick up the phone and call the listing agent of a pending home and say, hey, I've got a home that I'm putting on the market, or I've got a home my buyer's writing an offer on. Can you give me a clue how close to the sales price it came in at? A lot of agents don't want to take that extra measure, but I assure you it's worth it. I always do that before I write an offer or before I take a listing. I want to know what buyers have been willing to pay in this little vicinity that I'm getting ready to list or sell in. Does that make sense? Remember, buyers set the price. Number 3, actives. Why do actives matter? Whatever active listings that are in this little sphere we're looking at, that's the competition. That's very important. I recently had a sale, or a listing, that there were 4 other properties that were active. And so our strategic move was to wait until those closed. Number one, so there wouldn't be so many signs on the street. Because, you know, if you're looking at property and you see like all these signs on the street, you're like, why is everybody leaving? It was just an anomaly, very well established neighborhood. There was nothing wrong with the property or the neighborhood. But it was just one of those anomalies. It was like, what? Everyone at this certain time decides to sell their property. So that was a strategic move. Let's wait until these properties close. Another strategic move that it gave us was it enabled us to then see what those properties were pending or sold for. So that gives us a lot of power. And in the real estate industry, having the power is in having the knowledge. That's what really, really helps. So when we look at closed properties, pending properties, and active properties, now we have a really good idea of what buyers are willing to pay in your little neck of the woods. Now, I mentioned buyers willing to pay, but lenders willing to lend. That is an equally and sometimes even more important point. Why is that? Because anytime a buyer is going to buy a property, and you know, this may not be true with investors. I've worked with investors who are not my favorite to work with, nothing personal, but they're just bottom line, and I'm more about relationship and long term. That's okay though. Investors will come in super, super lowball, and it can get a seller shook up because it can be very insulting. But you have to understand how the mind of an investor works, and I'll do a whole other video on that, right? But for now, I want you to understand that most buyers who are going to buy in your home, and I'm assuming your home is over $400,000. I mean, in the medium price range that I work here in Carmichael, Arden Arcade, Fair Oaks, Natomas, we're usually looking at between 500 and 800,000, usually. So you have to understand that people that are investing in properties often are going to be owner occupied, but nevertheless, they're going to be using a loan. They don't have that much cash under their mattress. So if they're going to be using a loan, what is the first thing a lender does? Well, the first thing a lender does is they determine if that borrower is worthy of a loan. Their character, their credit, and their ability to pay. Meaning they look at their credit history, they look at how many collections or bankruptcies or foreclosures they have, and then they look at their income. And it has to be income that's been established over a couple years. So once the bank is determined, okay, this person has the character, the capacity, and the credit to borrow X amount from us, so we're going to write a letter of pre-approval, which will come when they write the offer for whatever property they're going to write an offer on. When the buyer sees your property, if the buyer wants that property and you have it priced within the range of what the lender letter says, so let's say your property is listed at $600,000 and the lender has approved this particular buyer to qualify for $600,000 in a home purchase, great, all systems are go, right? Slow down. Because the next thing that happens is an appraiser that the bank sends out, and the bank doesn't get to pick which appraiser it uses. It goes through an appraisal pool and it orders an appraisal. We don't have any more RESPA violations. Like I can't call an appraisal and say, hey, can you give me an appraisal on this property? Doesn't work like that anymore. Used to before the crash, but doesn't work like that anymore. So the bank will call the appraiser company. The appraiser company will come out and they will appraise your property. What is the appraiser going to base it on? Well, first of all, it's a little bit different if it's an FHA borrower. I'm not going to get into that right now, but let me just say that FHA borrowers have to use an appraiser that is FHA certified. Doesn't mean that appraiser can't also do conventional borrower appraisers. It just means that in order to represent a buyer as an appraiser in an FHA situation, government-backed loan, there's got to be certain standards that the property meets. And I won't go into the long story of it. Suffice it to say that usually with government-backed loans, the borrower is putting less money down, meaning they have less skin in the game, meaning the bank wants to make super sure that the property is move-in ready, maintained, not going to need a whole bunch of work done to it. Okay, so just let that be the answer for right now. We're going to assume that this borrower is conventional. So what is the appraiser going to do? He's going to come in, going to look at your house inside and out, and then he's going to pull up comps. And he's going to pull up comps of recently sold in your little area of actives and of pendings. And he's going to pick up the phone and he's going to ask agents who have pending sales, what is the close? What is the close price? What are they going to close at? He's also going to ask agents who have properties that have closed, did you give any concessions? And a concession is if the seller agrees to give $5,000 at closing, or a seller agrees to, do $1,800 worth of termite work. These are all normal in a real estate transaction, but they don't show up in MLS. So the appraiser, a good appraiser, picks up the phone and asks the listing agent these questions. Why? Because think about it, it matters on the value. So if your neighbor sold his home for $600,000, but he gave back $10,000 out of escrow at the close of escrow, out of his equity to make the deal work, that's not going to show up in MLS. So even though the property looks like it sold for $600,000, in reality, it sold for $590,000. Does that make sense? Appraisers want to know that stuff. And so after the appraiser does all that research and homework and compiles his report, which is more comprehensive than agents do, and that's because he also provides something called a cost appraisal, which is if you had to rebuild this house from scratch. Unfortunately, that's not the appraisal that the banks will use. They will use the market appraisal. So after all that's done, if the appraiser says this property value is at $590,000 and we've got it in escrow for $600,000, guess what? The bank will not lend on that property unless, and here's a big unless the buyer is willing to come out of pocket for that extra $10,000 or get a different kind of loan that includes it, which is really not that easy to do, but it's possible. Or the buyer just walks away and says, if you're not going to lower it by $10,000, I'm not taking the property. So these are really important things to consider. Now remember before I mentioned an FHA loan, a government-backed loan. It could be a CalVet, it could be a veterans loan, a VA, could be a first-time home buyer's FHA loan. But here's what you have to remember. When that appraiser that's FHA certified comes out to look at your property to assess its value, its appraised value, and it is a government-backed loan, that appraisal is going to stick like super glue to your property for 6 months. That means that anyone else, any other buyers who are looking at your property, you have an appraisal, and if it's an FHA, the borrower, it's got to be disclosed. To be frank with you, even if it's not an FHA buyer, it's a conventional buyer, and they ask, has there been an appraisal done? I cannot lie, and I have to disclose that. It's just the way that the business is done in order to maintain integrity. Okay, and I'm sure you understand that. We have to disclose everything we know about the property that could indicate a red flag for the buyers. So, that being said, I want you to think about when you list your price, or when you list your home, and you have an agent, and the agent says, according to the comps, and if that agent did the comps that I suggested, recent sales, pendings, and actives for competition, and then they look at your house, because no agent should ever give you a home value, ever, without going and physically walking on your property. Now, I sometimes have people set up a Zoom call with me, and they do it on their phone, and they walk me through their house because they just really want to know, before they invite me into their home, they want to really know what I think the value is, because I won't give a value over the phone. If I can see the property and I can look up the neighborhood and I know the neighborhood and maybe I do a drive-by, I can give you a range. I'm still not going to nail it down to an exact price. Why? Because that's your job. I'm going to give you all the information. I'm going to give you my expert opinion, but at the end of the day, you have to set the price. So let's say we go through all this and you set the price at $600,000. First of all, if you and I have more of a $50,000 difference, I won't take the listing. I will respectfully, and with all gratitude for your time, I will respectfully decline to list your property, because I don't want you to overprice your property and then get into it and either not have anyone buy it and then it becomes a stale listing, and and then agents get mad because they're like, this is way overpriced, we don't want that, and then they won't show it. And in case the appraisal comes through and they're like, nope, even if you've got a deal in escrow and the appraiser's like, nope, this is $50,000 over current value, you're going to get mad. So I don't want to play that game. I want to sell your home fast, under my guarantee, and I want to get you the top dollar. But the only way that that works is if we're pricing it accurately. And this is real estate, and real estate's cyclical. So what's accurate today may not be accurate in a month. Heck, it might not even be accurate in a week. But generally speaking, in this area, prices kind of stabilize from month to month. And then, if there's going to be a change, we'll notice it as a trend. It doesn't usually hit like that, but sometimes it can. Look at 2008, right? So at the end of the day, you price your home at what you hope that it's valued at, based on your agent's hard work, and hopefully the agent did all the work, especially if you're not in the Sacramento area and you're not using me. Make sure that agent looked at recent sales, pendings, and actives. And after you've assessed all that, and the agent has given you his or her opinion on current market value, and you kind of have your own idea, and you guys come together, and you find a figure that works, you have to understand that that figure may vary. And I'll walk you through how. But all I'm saying is, please don't get that sales price tattooed on your forearm, because it's going to be different. And I have a lot of agents who will give you the net sheet and, okay, this is what you're going to get, and blah, blah, blah. And then sellers get that price, that value, that dollar amount, the equity in their head, and they think that's the bottom line. That's what I'm getting. And that is not fair to you. It's not fair to anybody who might want to buy your home because they come in at a lower price because the values have changed, or because they're not willing to pay that much. And so you have to take all this into consideration. So let's say you and your agent both decide this is worth $600,000. This is the current market value of my home. This is what the others have been selling for. This is what it looks like. Okay, good. And then a buyer comes in and they offer you $550,000. I never say, oh, let's just reject it all, because this is a negotiable industry. I suggest we do a counter. Now, there's so many variables. How long has it been sitting on the market? How qualified are these buyers? And how motivated and desirable to move are you? Because you can reject it flat out, or you can counter it. So someone else may come across and they may write a clean offer for $600,000. But what if we don't see? Well, I'll see, but you don't see at first blush in the small print. They want $20,000 at closing to help with their closing cost, or to fix termite damage, or whatever's going on. So you're really not selling it for $600,000. You're really selling it for $580,000. Get it? So you have to, when you get the price, I don't want you to get shell shock. I don't want you to see the price that someone is offering on your home and think that's the end of the story. First of all, there's often counter offers. It's very, very normal for buyers to come in at a lower price than what they're willing to pay and what the lender is willing to lend on, because they're negotiating. So instead of just throwing the baby out with the bathwater, we negotiate back. And listen, you're the seller. At the end of the day, if you don't want to take an offer, we reject it. But there's a lot of offers that people reject that really could be saved with a little bit of negotiation, a little bit of you give and I'll give, right? I had one, let's say, for example, a property's listed at $590, and the buyer comes in at $550. The seller's like, heck no. I'm like, okay, let's negotiate down. So we go from the $590, and we came down $10,000 and countered, and they went up $10,000 and countered. And so then we find a sweet spot, and then maybe the negotiation gets down to another $5,000 or $10,000. And it depends. Are the buyers asking for any seller concessions? Do they want you to fix a bunch of stuff? Do they want you to help with closing costs? So we come to this happy medium where the buyers feel good about it. The lenders feel good about lending because it's going to meet the appraised price value, and you feel good about it. But you're not going to feel good about it if you get this certain number in your head at the very beginning and you're dead set on it and you are not open to negotiations. So I know that's kind of like hard medicine, and I wish I could give you a spoonful of sugar to make it go down. But at the end of the day, buyers ultimately determine the value of your home. So they don't get to make it up out of the air. They don't get to say, oh, I'm only paying $500,000 for that house. they should know by looking at comps, by listening to, hopefully they have an educated agent, and their check mark, like their checkmate, I should say, is the lender. Because if the lender doesn't agree that what the buyer's offering is valued at that, then the lender's not going to lend, right? So it's kind of this union between buyer, seller, and lender. And that's what we have to work with. And so being open-minded and being open to negotiations and looking at all the different variables that exist, super, super important. Okay, I hope you have a great day. If I can help you, if you'd like to set up a Zoom call, click on the link below or just give me a text message. My number is down there. Would love to meet with you, love to see your home and talk more about listing your property. Have a beautiful day.